Good evening, all. We are in for a treat this evening, and I will be a little bit less tense when the winemaker can join us. At the moment, they have some technical difficulties, hence the delay. But I thought I'd let you in to share the tension and the stress from the Bird household. You join me here in the Scottish borders, up at the in-laws' house on the River Tweed, and we will soon be joined by Christian from AR Lenoble. But before he joins, I thought it would be a nice idea to hear as many champagne corks pop throughout the evening. So if you haven't opened your champagne yet, then that's good to hear. I will ask you, perhaps not all at the same time, but whatever you fancy opening the bottle, to unmute yourself, pop the cork, and it'll feel like the first day at Lord's or Ascot Ladies' Day, it'll be jolly. I've enjoyed Lenoble. Here we have Christian is joining us. We are in luck. I'll bring him in. I've known Lenoble well, certainly for as long as I've been at Stanley, which is only a short time, only 2 years. But I drunk Lenoble before I joined at La Gavroche. I didn't actually know it at the time, but La Gavroche had a special relationship with AR Lenoble for many years, I believe. Well, Christian can fill us in, but it was their house fizz. I think it still is their house fizz. And anyway, if it's good enough for La Gavroche, it's good enough for the Bird House. So and certainly good enough for Stanley. But thank you all for joining. My role here is to do nothing but introduce Christian, who is joining us live from Champagne. And there he is. And Christian, I'm going to ask to unmute you. And I'm going to say over to you. And please, give us a little history of the domain. Well, we're here to celebrate 100 years. That's a good noise. 100 years of Lenoble. So congratulations to you. Congratulations to the Champagne House.
Thank you.
And thumbs up all round. Here you are coming on screen now.
Hello. Well, thank you very much to everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good?
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm very happy to do this tasting, but I also wanted to say that the most important thing for us is that you come and visit us here in Champagne. This is wonderful, and we're going to have a really good time tonight, but as one of the last completely family-owned, completely independent houses in Champagne, we want you to come and visit us and taste with us and hang out in the vineyard with us and spend as much time with us as possible. So as Tom underlined, AR Lenoble, we're one of the last completely family-owned, but most importantly, completely independent houses in Champagne. In Champagne, we are 5,412 producers in total. You have to remember something about Champagne. Champagne as a region, we are 3% of the volume of wines produced in France, 3% of the volume. We're 22% of the value. Most champagne is a commodity. Most of it is marketed as a luxury good. Most of it, in my opinion, is very overpriced. For us, Lenoble, everything that we do ourselves completely independently. The house was started in 1920 by Armand Raphael Grazer. So my name, Holthausen, is Alsatian. It sounds German, but it's not. Grazer, same thing. It sounds German, but it's actually Alsatian. Most of the original founders of champagne houses in the 18th and 19th century, everyone from the Bollingers, the Tattingers, the Heidzigs, the Roderers, the Krugs, they were all German families. The problem that Armand Raphael Graser had was he arrived in Champagne from his native Alsace during the First World War, which completely devastated Eastern France. We still talk about the First World War in Champagne and Alsace today. So having a last name that even sounded a little German, like Graser, was suicide. So he arrived in Champagne in 1915. He founded AR Lenoble in 1920. And he changed the name to Lenoble. So he kept his initial Armand Raphael, but he created the brand Lenoble. So today we are the only completely family-owned house in Champagne that doesn't have the actual name of the family on the label of the house. On a positive note, Germany is a very, very good, strong, positive market for us. So 100 years later, we're still, we're okay. But at the time, it was the reason why he needed to create a brand. So Armand Raphael managed the house until his death in 1947. In 1947, it passed to his son, Joseph. Joseph was really a great guy for public relations, for receiving people at the domain. He also saw that the potential for Champagne Lenoble was the export market, because up until his arrival, Lenoble was only sold in France. And in 1966, he found the very first person in the world that imported Lenoble in another country outside of France. And it was Stephen Spurrier. And Stephen Spurrier was working as a young wine merchant at the time in London. And he was the very first person that took on Lenoble in the UK. Stephen went on to serve Lenoble at his wedding in 1968. And 2 years ago, he came to the domain and brought his original price list from when he sold Lenoble back in 1968. But it really is thanks to Stephen that Lenoble became very, very well known in the UK. To Tom's point, we have been the house Champagne at Le Gavroche for 22 years now. After Joseph passed away, his nephew Jean-Marie took over in 1973, and then his great-granddaughter Anne in 1993. So Anne was very young, 1993. She was 27 years old. Saturday afternoon, she was at the domain by herself working. There was a knock on the door. Hello, my name is Albert Roux. I'm here to see if I can taste some champagne. He didn't have an appointment, like anything. She had no idea who he was. He came in with his wife. They tasted wines for like 4 hours, and they became really, really good friends, which they still are to this day. And he said, I just heard good things about Lenoble. I've never been here before. You welcomed me on a Saturday without an appointment. I want to say thank you. I'm making you the house Champagne at the Gavroche, and we've been the house Champagne at the Gavroche ever since, which is quite cool.
It's a wonderful story. I forgot to say to everyone, please fire questions through the chat, as many questions as possible, and I will keep an eye on that for you, Christian. So if I see them coming in, I'll interrupt.
And I apologize to everyone in advance, because I really am French. I really am properly French. But my father was the crazy one that went off and married an American woman. So I am half French and also half American. So in case you're wondering, who is this guy that Tom put on? I promise I really am French, and I really do live here in Champagne. So Lenoble, we are celebrating our 100-year birthday this year, our centenary, which is quite cool for us. To go back to what I said before about volume and value, most houses in Champagne are propped up by very, very large wine and spirits groups. What we're most proud of is not that it's family owned, but that we're completely independent. We are 11 people at the domain: Anne, Antoine, brother and sister, the 4th generation, myself. We have 4 people that work in the vineyards and 4 people that work in the cellars. All of us are based at the domain, and that is 100% of Champagne AR Lenoble. We don't have any subcontractors, brand ambassadors, hostesses, warehousing plants, nothing at all. Does Lenoble own all of its own vineyards? So we own 18 hectares of vineyards in Champagne. We have 10 hectares in the Grand Cru village of Chouilly. So Chouilly is the very first Grand Cru on the Côte Blanc. So we have 17 Grand Cru in Champagne. 6 of them are located on the Côte Blanc. The very northernmost one is Chouilly. So Chouilly is the closest Grand Cru to the Marne River. So years ago, people would always say Champagne, it's all chalk. It's not all chalk. We also have clay. We also have limestone. We also have sand. We have a lot of other things. Chouilly, closest to the Marne, we have a lot of clay in the soil. So the Chardonnay from Chouilly has a tendency to have a very rich, creamy, buttery character to it. Crémant, which is the Grand Cru next to us, is also quite similar, a bit more on the creamy floral side. As you go down one more to Avise, I love Avise. Avise is that like amazing knife edge minerality that you get when you taste wines by, say, Pascal Agrippa, Salos. Le Mesnil-sur-Roger is also very, very minerally. So one of the things that we encourage people to do when they come to Champagne is not only visit our village, but also visit the villages of our neighbors so that you can see Chardonnay from 4 or 5 different villages. So the 10 hectares of Chardonnay in Chouilly, Grand Cru, that's 100% ours. We only use our own Chardonnay in all of our wines. So tonight, the Gentilhomme that you're tasting, that's 100% Domaine. The Grand Cru Blanc Le Blanc Chouilly 2012, which is what Tom and I are both drinking tonight, that is 100% Domaine as well.
I should probably explain, sorry, I should probably explain why we're not drinking the Gentilhomme. Sannery only had, there's none left. We had 23 bottles.
Yeah.
There are 23 of us on this call. There wasn't one for me. But I have the 2012 that most people also have at home, which I hope some will open as well. And Christopher, there's nothing left at the Champagne House, or what's left is
the 2009 Gentilhomme. We have 180 bottles left, but we decided to put them downstairs and release them. I don't know, maybe for our 200th anniversary. But we decided to keep the few bottles that we had now. And we've just released the Gentilhomme Vintage 2013, which was the next vintage afterwards. But just to finish for the gentleman that asked the question about our vineyards. So the Chardonnay is always ours. We have 6 hectares of Pinot Noir in Bissailles. Bissailles is located in the Petit Valais, Montagne des Arantes, so just going up. It's right next to Tort-sur-Marne, which is very famous for Laurent Perrier, and Marois-Soreille, which is very famous for Philippina, Pouillon, producers like that. It is pure chalk. The topsoil is like this. So in Bissailles, it's the most mineral expression of Pinot Noir you can possibly imagine. So the Pinot Noir is always from us. We have 2 hectares of Meunier in Damery, which is in the Marne Valley, which is a combination of clay and chalk and sand, but we only have 2 hectares. So for 2 of our wines, the Brut Entente and the Brut Nature, we do purchase some Meunier from Caroline that lives literally across the street, and from Philippe, who is about half a kilometer down the road. So we do buy in some Meunier when we need it, but the Chardonnay is always ours and the Pinot Noir is always ours. All of our vineyards have been certified Haute Valeur Environnementale since 2012. So concretely what that means is we are completely organically certified with one caveat. We have a real mildew problem in Champagne, like massive mildew problem. It rains more in Champagne than any other region in France with the exception of Alsace. I could be out in the vineyard treating mildew with copper sulfite, and then I could be organic, fine. But if I was treating with copper, I'd be out in the vineyards treating like maybe 25 or 30 times a year. So we are now about 150 producers in Champagne that say, no, we're not organic, we're haute valeur environnementale. Stop this false dichotomy of up, down, you are or you're not. It's the same thing when people say, do you like natural wines? I'm like, I like some, but I don't like all. I don't like to just fit into a category. For us, we haven't used herbicides or pesticides in 20 years of any kind. We're working on a way to fix the mildew situation. But for right now, we do treat mildew chemically if we have to. 2018, we didn't have to treat against mildew a single time. 2019, if we didn't treat, we would have lost a big portion of the harvest. So viticulture for us is definitely very, very an important part of who we are. Most people in Champagne, they say, we buy grapes, we have a house style that they've been making the same way for 200 years. I think that's ridiculous. You should not be making the same wine you've been making for 200 years. Make better wine. My hope is that we meet up at the Domaine in 10 years and you say, Christian, that Gentilhomme 2009 that we had was amazing, but the Gentilhomme 2019 is like 10 times better. That's the point. Make better wine every year, not just this idea of a house style.
Fine ambition. Perhaps talk us through the range, and let's have a good look at the Gentilhomme 09 as well. But
so for us, the heart and soul of what we do is obviously our non-vintage wines. The issue we have in Champagne is climate change. I mean, climate change is really huge. The harvest this year will be starting for us August 19th or August 20th. So what we have done with our Brut non-vintage range, the entire range, is we've completely redone the way that we craft them. So my father's generation, you had tons of acidity, but you had no maturity, you had no sugar, no alcohol. My generation, I have tons of sugar, tons of alcohol, tons of maturity, but very, very, very little acidity. Every single year, the acidity, and the pH keeps going up. So if you guys were at the Domaine with me right now, we went downstairs and I pulled up a bottle of vintage 1979, which Stannery has a few bottles of. If I disgorged it tonight right now and we drank it, you'd be like, wow, Christian, this is so fresh, because it's been aging on the lees for 40 years. So we realized that if we could do that with our vintage wines, maybe we could use that technology, that craft, for our non-vintage wines. So our Brut Entente, Grand Cru Blanc de Blanc, Brut Nature, and Rosé, they all contain between 40 and 50% reserve wines, but all of the reserve wines are aged in magnums under a bar and a half of pressure for 4 to 6 years before they're blended. So the current release from the house for our non-vintage wines is the Brut Entente Mag 16. So what that means is you have 60% of the wine is from 2016. Then you have 40% reserve wines that before they were blended into the base 16, they spent 5 years aging on the lees. They were then blended in, and then the final blend went downstairs for another 3.5 years. So my dad's generation, you needed reserve wines to add richness and complexity. My generation, you need reserve wines to add freshness. The world is upside down. You need to actually freshen up your wines. So for us, the heart and soul of what we do is really those 4 wines: the Brut Entente, the Grand Cru Blanc Blanc Chouilly, Brut Nature, and the Rosé Terroir. Those are the most important wines for us. We declare vintages very, 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 very seldom. The wine that Tom and I are drinking tonight is the Grand Cru Blanc de Blanc Chouilly, vintage 2012. This is the 3rd release this century. We released 2002, 2008, and the 2012 we just released last month. There's 2 reasons for this. We believe that if you make a vintage, it needs to really be a vintage, like a proper vintage. It's a different model. Some people in Champagne make a vintage every year because people think vintage is better and they'll buy a vintage. So for me, 2001, 2003, 2005, 2007, they were horrible. But we have lots of neighbors that continued to make a vintage every year. For us, if your daughter or son was born in 2012, they're very lucky because this wine will be amazing in 40 years. They were born in 2011, I'm not sure. If they were born in 2003, the wine for me is already dead. So for us, we only make vintages when you should. The other thing is you cannot have 40 to 50% reserve wines in your non-vintage range if you're cranking out a vintage every single year. So for us, we put all of our effort onto the non-vintage wines. by keeping our vintage-worthy wines in reserves and then blending them in at the time. The 2012 Blanc de Blanc, I mean, we made 14,000 bottles. I mean, that's it. The last release was 2008. So we don't make a lot. We then have a Blanc de Noir, which is a Premier Cru Blanc de Noir from Anne and Antoine's mother's village of Visay. The 2013 we just released, we made 7,000 bottles. So that's quite rare as well. And then the wine that you're tasting now, the Gentilhomme. So the Gentilhomme 2009, this was just 5,000 bottles. It is 100% Chardonnay from Chouilly Cru. It comes from Montaigu, Le Vallon, and Cité, which are the three prime vineyard sites, lieux-dits, that we have in Chouilly. It was 100% vinification in wood. For us, we have 164 small barrels from Terranceau and François Frère. We like them both. And then we also have 9 big 5,000 liter foutres from François Frère. So the Gentilhomme was blended completely in small barrels. This 2009 that you're drinking now from Stannery was disgorged last year. So you have 10 years of aging on the lease. The idea with this wine is to really showcase something unique. Gentilhomme, we make in weird years. We made it in 2006 because it was like a bulldozer. We made it in 2009 because the elegance, I hate when Champenois talk about Burgundy, but the 2009 Gentilhomme for me is so Burgundian. It's just like, it really tastes like you could be drinking like Merceau. And the 2013, the quality of the Chardonnay on the northern part of the Côte de Blanc was just absolutely like amazing. So for us, the Gentilhomme is something that we make in very special years. The last one we have, which we're not tasting tonight, but we will taste it at the Domaine when you come see us, is Les Aventures. Les Aventures is one single vineyard called Les Aventures in Chouilly, and it's a blend of 2 to 3 different vintages. The current release is a blend of 2008 and 2009. We make 2,100 bottles every time. So those wines and the Gentilhomme that we're having tonight and the vintage 2012 that Tom and I are having is it's quite a small production for us.
Daniel's question, why is there a change towards declaring so many vintages by other champagne houses? Is it purely a marketing reason, or does global warming improve your chances of making more good vintages in a row, or within a decade? I mean,
there's 2 things. The thing in Champagne is that it's fair to say that global warming was a good thing, and I'm being very, very, very careful about the way that's phrased, was a good thing in the 80s and 90s, because we stopped struggling for maturity, and we stopped struggling for alcohol, and we stopped struggling for sugar. Look at dosage in Champagne today. Dosage today in Champagne, I mean, is like 4 or 5 grams. 20 years ago, it was like 12 to 15 grams because we really struggled for sugar. So global warming has helped us in a certain way. The problem is it's like a locomotive, and it just needs to stop, and it's not stopping. So it's been good for Champagne. The problem, Champagne is not, I mean, you guys are all very, very, experienced with Champagne, but also with Burgundy. So Burgundy is all about the vintage, huh? But for us in Champagne, it's usually about a collection of like many, many different things to create like a multi-vintage wine. Some neighbors are saying that because things have warmed up, they're able to have a better quality of a vintage every single year. My feelings personally, and we're very much gentlemen here at the property. I don't name names, but I know that some people declare a vintage as often as possible in Champagne, because the average consumer in the world, vintage is better, I'll pay more for vintage. So they declare a vintage whenever they can. I don't really believe in that. I'm kind of a proletariat here. I think that most champagne is really, really overpriced. Tom and I were having a conversation earlier today about this. Like, for me, I think Champagne needs to relax a bit, because Champagne as a region, a bit like Bordeaux, for so many years, it was like the only thing in town. My grandfather, Champagne was the best. He had never, ever, ever tasted anything like not cava, not prosecco, not francicorta, not wine from Kent or from Sussex, not Tasmania, but he just knew that Champagne was the best. My generation now, I feel like I would much rather have Lenoble served next to an amazing producer of English sparkling wine, an amazing producer from Sonoma, an amazing producer from Tasmania, rather than next to a Champenois that's jacking his wines with herbicides and pesticides and chemicals and declaring a vintage every year because he's trying to make a margin. You have to remember in Champagne that every single piece of land that we can plant is planted. Where I am in Champagne, not in the vineyard, but at the house, it's about 10,000 euros a hectare. If it's declared where you can plant grapes, you're minimum 1.5 million euros a hectare. Grand Cru, you're talking 3 million minimum. Believe me, it's a bad joke we have in Champagne, but some people, if they could dig up their grandfather to plant 2 vines on his grave, they would. Every single thing is planted. So the only way to move forward is a value strategy, which is why you're seeing more vintages, more vintages, more vintages. And to the person that asked the question about just a second ago about devaluing, yes, I think so. Which is why we pay very, very careful attention. Again, we make 200,000 bottles a year. I mean, like, we're a very, very small producer. Because we're independent, I don't have a shareholder with a gun to my head in Paris telling me, you have to do this, you have to do this. But for a lot of producers that are making, 4 or 5 million bottles, I think they do feel a lot of pressure. And the only way that they can grow their business is value, because volume, they can't do that anymore. My feeling is that producers like us are going to be okay. Producers like Moet, Hennessy, Pernod Ricard, they're fine as well, because they're making, Moet Hennessy between Veuve Clicquot, Moet Chandon, Dom Pérignon, Krug, Mercier, and Ruinart, that's like almost a third of the entire Champagne appellation. That's massive. So they're fine, we're fine. My fear, sort of medium term in Champagne, is all of the producers that are kind of playing around like 2 to 3 million bottles a year. They're not small enough to be able to talk about vineyards like we can, but they're also not big enough to be able to control as much as they do. So I think that in the medium term, that's probably what the challenge is going to be for the appellation.
Fascinating. And not a loaded question, but I'm always fascinated to know, how important is it to the house, to you, to have your wines in the top restaurants in Paris and London or New York, versus being bought by the people on this call tonight, private collectors, consumers? I often get the impression that for some winemakers, they couldn't care less whether we had them in our cellars. All they want is to see them on the list of a great restaurant. What's the view of the house?
I'll give you my personal view, my view as Christian. Although I'm pretty sure Anne and Antoine would say the same way. We have restaurants, chefs. The Gavroche is a perfect example. But Cabot in London. We have many places in London that love us and support us, and we're really, really happy to have their support. But what I really like is being able to exchange with the actual consumers that are buying our wines and cellaring our wines, and that's why I'm really excited to have the chance to welcome one of you who knows who he is. I don't know if I'm allowed to name him. There you are. Gideon's coming to see me on Wednesday. But this for me is great when you could actually sit down and have like a conversation with someone that bought your wines, that likes your wines, that wants to know about your new wines. I think you can have a much more personal relationship. In restaurants, very often we have relationships with the chef or with the sommelier, but you don't necessarily have the chance to interact with the end buyer, the end fan of your wine. I think what you said is really funny though, Tom, because I meet so many people in Champagne. Like, for example, every November, there's about 30 of us that are selected to go to La Fête du Champagne, which some of you might have gone to when it was in London a few years ago, but it's usually in New York. And it's sort of like the best producers. So all the producers go. And it's really funny because I would say half of them only want to go to the same 10 restaurants, like the same exact 10 restaurants. Like this guy wants to go there, this guy wants to go there. And every time I go, I always do a dinner with like private consumers, usually like at my mom's flat. Like I usually am like, hey, like let's get together and do something that's much more of an exchange. I don't like standing up in front of a room and having to do all that. Like I think it's much better when you can actually be in a much more intimate circle, if that makes sense. Because you know, at the end of the day, like it's not about just having your wine on a list. I laugh because, you know, in Paris we're on so many lists, but the lists are this big. So, okay, you might be on the list, but like how many people are buying your wine? 3 or 4 a year? I mean, if the champagne section on a wine list in Paris at a 3 Michelin star restaurant, just the champagne section is 28 pages long, like, I mean, okay, it's great, but I think a lot of the champenois, it's a bit about their ego. They want to say, oh, I'm on the list here, I'm on the list here. Well, I don't know. Does that answer? Does that sound good?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I often think that I always wonder how many bottles are sold when you're on those lists, and it's going to be tiny. It's going to be tiny. Yeah, it is just. I like Gideon's question, talking about the still wines of the region, and with global warming. Do you think there is more potential going forward to making quality still reds?
Gideon, we'll discuss this on Wednesday in detail. It's a really good question. The thing that's funny is that lots of people are kind of panicking and trying to figure out like what to do. I mean, the harvest this year looks like 19th to the 20th. The 8 earliest harvests that we've had in the history of the Champagne appellation have been this century. Like, we have birds that came here during my father's childhood. They don't come back because it doesn't get cold enough for them. We have flowers that don't grow here anymore. I mean, climate change is a very serious thing. We've got a few things going on. A lot of people in Champagne started blocking malolactic fermentation 5-6 years ago. We do sort of a partial blockage. We do about 85 to 90%. We've blocked the last 5 years. We pay attention to sulfur, so we don't want it to go too crazy, but our wines are blocking malo for the last 5 or 6 years for sure. Some people are playing around with the forgotten varieties of Champagne. I mean, everyone talks about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and Meunier, but we also have Petit Melier, Arbonne, Pinot Blanc, and Pinot Gris, which can also be used in Champagne. Those 4 varieties together represent not even 1% of all the grapes that are planted in Champagne. So some people are playing around with those. There is some thought that perhaps Arbonne Petit Melier might be a bit more resistant to climate change. There's some producers like Talon, producers like Drapier that are experimenting with that right now. For us, we're still Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Meunier. But even that, I mean, we talk very openly about Meunier, like Krug talks about Meunier, Charles Heidsieck talks about Meunier. Like 20 years ago, everyone only talked about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Like Meunier was this like bastard child that no one talked about, even if it represents like, you know, 35% of the Champagne appellation. So I think there's a lot of potential for the certain cépage oublié, the forgotten varieties of Champagne. The next big thing is sort of the Coteau Champenois. The Coteau Champenois is making a still white wine or a still red wine from the region. Some are very good, like Boulanger makes a very, very good one. Berèche makes a very, very good one as well. Charles Heidsieck is making some now that are quite good. My feeling, the issue that I have is that the grapes are so expensive in Champagne. The average price for kilo in 2019 was €7.50 a kilo. You're 1.3, 1.4 kilos just for the raw material to make a bottle of champagne. So that's just for champagne. Imagine if that price gets extended to do a still wine. For me, I think it's interesting to taste. I don't know if commercially it'll make a lot of sense, because I think for you guys in the UK now, you'd be like, if I'm gonna pay 50 quid for a bottle of Coteau Champenois, wouldn't I spend 50 quid for a bottle of like 70 Les Beaunes? Like for me, I think that it's something that people are playing around with, but I don't know. But it could happen. I mean, remember, Champagne is famous for one reason. Clovis, our very first king of France, converted to Christianity in what became Reims in the 5th century in 496. And then where he was crowned, eventually that became the cathedral. Every single French monarch had to be crowned in Reims before they could take the throne in Paris. So we were the king of wines and the wine of kings, blah, 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 going all the way back like, 16th century. But we've only been sparkling for the last 300 years. So there is a chance that I don't know what's going to happen in 100 years, but it's a real question.
Christian, first, a classic question from Alice. What's your favorite vintage from the 20th century? We've mentioned 79. We don't have those bottles. That very generous allocation you gave us of 3 bottles. They unfortunately have gone, but if you have any more of those, do let us know. But yes, 79 was clearly a benchmark vintage for the century. Do you have a personal favorite?
I do. I mean, I have a few personal favorites. First of all, Alice, I don't know what year you are, but I am born in 1974, which is like horrible. Like it is like the worst year in Champagne. My poor sister is 1977, which is like just as bad. So when I go to visit friends, they say, Christian, I have no 74. No one made 74. I've got 73, 76. My sister, it's like, I've got 76 or like 79. So our birth years are like absolutely horrible. For us this year, we decided that, and then come back to the question, that this is not to say negative things about anyone in Champagne, do whatever you want. But we think this idea of this like cuvée de centenaire, this like special blend that you made for your 100-year anniversary or 200-year anniversary was just really hollow and not really us. Like for us, the thing that people really like about Lenoble is that we're very honest. I would much rather that you said, you know what, I hate Lenoble, I hate these wines, rather than say, they're okay. Like at least we have personality, at least we have something to say. Nothing's more depressing than making a meal for your loved one and having them say, it's okay. So for us, we want to actually constantly, create things that have a bit of character and a bit of personality. We thought a lot for many years about, do we make some special thing for our anniversary? And then we said, no, this is our centenary this year. Instead of making some fake made up cuvée, why don't we release older vintages made by the previous generations of the family? So at the end of the year, this year, we are releasing 1959, 1982, 85, 86, 88, 90, 96, and 2002. So those are all really great vintages. Me personally, I really like 1995 because it was such a great year, and I was very young, and I remember 1995 was such an amazing year. But then 1996 came on the scene, and 1996 is this like amazing, high acidity, everyone wants it vintage, and it eclipsed a lot of the great 1995. So me personally, I really like 1995. I like 1988. 1988 was so hot and crazy, and many producers, Crude very famously, released the 89 before they released the 1988. So I think the 88 is quite cool in Champagne as well. I really like 2009, because, which you guys have now in the Gentilhomme, because 2009 was not great everywhere in Champagne, but on the northern part of the Côte Blanc, like in Crémant, Roiry, and Chouilly, like amazing.
These are all good answers. Excellent question from iPhone. iPhone's asking, I find a spicy note, dried ginger, mixed spice in a lot of your wines, particularly the Aventure and the Gentilhomme. Do you know what I mean, and where do you think that's coming from? Is that something that you've come across, this gingery note, dried ginger, mixed spice?
Where is iPhone? I'm looking for iPhone. Who's iPhone? Where are you?
iPhone.
Who's iPhone? I don't see him.
iPhone doesn't have their video up.
Okay, cool. Yes, I definitely think that this is a stylistic thing. I take dry ginger, mixed spice quite a bit. Les Aventures and Gentilhomme, we play around with wood on both of them for sure, and we play around with oxidation on those for sure. Gentilhomme and Les Aventures are very, very different in style. Again, Gentilhomme is 3 parcels, 1 vintage. Les Aventures is 2 to 3 vintages from 1 parcel. Gentilhomme does its complete secondary fermentation under crown cap. Les Aventures does its complete secondary fermentation under natural cork. So both of them we play around with quite a bit, but people do get a lot of spiciness in our wines for sure. There's also a salon, the kind of like salty element that comes through in a lot of our wines as well, I think. If that answers your question.
Do you, as a champagne house, promote champagne as a food drink rather than a sort of celebratory aperitif drink? And if so, what would be the ideal match? This is a question from Louise. Ideal match food-wise with this 09.
We do. I mean, the thing that I find really funny is, and again, it's my sort of like proletariat side coming out, but we talk about champagne as this like luxury thing, and that goes back to Clovis in the 5th century, where it was always the king of wines and the wine of kings. What I love, and it's so funny because in France, in the UK, in Japan, in the US, in Sweden, it's the exact same article in December in every like consumer magazine and like newspaper. It's always like, what's the best food to serve with your champagne? And it's always these like ridiculous things like oyster, caviar, lobster. And I feel like, most people, like if they have caviar like once in their life, like, they're like thrilled. I mean, most people are not like, popping down to Waitrose and like picking up caviar like on a regular basis. So one of the things that we feel is very important here at the house is like, let's be real. Like, you know what I had with the Gentilhomme 2013 last night? I had a roast chicken. We have this guy, Clément, that is a farmer down the road. He farms amazing organic chickens. Like, they're just great. And I went and, I picked up a chicken. It was cleaned, and I put it in the oven for 90 minutes. And we sat down and we had dinner with the Gentilhomme 2013, and it was absolutely perfect. And then after that, we had Comté 18 months, easy, cool. And it was really, really nice. So I think for us, we try to keep the pairings a little bit more real and simple. We drink champagne all throughout the meal in Champagne because we live in Champagne. But in most parts of the world, it's not something that most people are very used to doing. Honestly, Paris is an hour and a half from here. Huh? And in Paris, champagne with a meal, they have no idea. Yes, I know you're not drinking the Gentilhomme, but you have some tasting notes on it. Yes, it's chicken for sure. If you have a roast chicken, throw it in the oven. I think that's really cool. For me, I said I think it has this very kind of Meursault-y kind of feel to it. To Jess's question, the reason Gentilhomme is vintage, Aventure is non-vintage. So basically, Gentilhomme is a reflection of 1 year, whereas Les Aventures is a reflection of 1 parcel. Again, Gentilhomme, on average, we're doing 5,000 to 6,000 bottles every time we make it. Les Aventures is about 2,000 bottles every time we make it. So the idea is to show vintage here, and the idea here is to show a specific parcel.
Mrs.
What?
Bird and I have a regular Friday night champagne night, and we've gotten the habit of that also being curry night. And this is a really new thing for us, but a mildly spiced curry with champagne works. Is that something you've discovered yourself?
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna move the, ready? Okay, moving. That's exactly what I have on the stove right now. And I promise that Tom and I did not set this up in advance, but curry, that's exactly what I have on the stove right now. It's exactly what I have on the stove right now. So for us, yeah, I mean, I think you can even go crazy, like with the gentilhomme, like you can do like lamb curry for sure. I think that's absolutely like not a problem. Something that has a bit of backbone to it, but yeah, definitely.
How funny. We should talk about the 2013 release.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware that it had just come out, so Jason hasn't shared that with us as a team. Is there an allocation coming our way?
Yeah, definitely for sure. Our number one market in the world outside of France is the UK, and our number two market in the world outside of France is Japan. So basically for these wines that we release, it's usually France, the UK, and Japan that get the first shot. The 2013 is awesome. 2013 was this crazy vintage that many collectors are now saying that they think that it's one of the best vintages champagne has ever had. Classic vintage champagne, like classic, everywhere was good. If you're a winemaker in Champagne and you couldn't make a great vintage in 2002 or 2008 or 2012, you should really hang it up. Like you should not be a winemaker anymore. 2013, it wasn't as great of a vintage based on the analytics at first, but then we just kept going back and we were like, wow, this is really cool. And now a lot of 2013s are starting to be released within the last like maybe 3 or 4 months. And people are really seeing like just how amazing 2013 very was. For sure, much more austere, for sure, much more sort of linear, but like amazing, the 2013 Gentilhomme, like really good.
So we've discovered who iPhone is. iPhone is Stephen.
Hi, Stephen.
Stephen actually has my favorite question of the evening. What proportion of your wines do you release in Magnum? Let's talk about big formats. We want to see more Lenoble in Magnum. Are you producing more in Magnum now? And I've yet to see the Aventure in Magnum. Is it ever made?
No. Well, the Magnum thing is funny, and Gideon, I'm counting on you to send the picture to Tom, because when you come to visit us in the cellars next week, you go down and you'll be like, why is there all Magnums? Our cellar, we have over 220,000 Magnums only filled with reserve wines that we are aging for between 4 and 6 years to then blend into our non-vintage wines. So we're using the Magnums essentially for the preservation of our reserve wines. So a bottle of champagne like you guys are having now, if you're having if you've moved up to the 2012, or if you're having the Gentilhomme, it's 6 bars of pressure. Our reserve wines are kept under 1.5 bars of pressure. The idea is just to keep them fresh. So the Magnums obviously have a perfect surface ratio. So basically they age very slowly. So for the Magnums of reserve wines, you don't get a lot of autolytic character. You just keep them fresh. You just get a tiny bit of it. Usually Magnums for vintages, we release like 2, 3, 4, whatever years after we release the vintage bottles, for sure. Les Aventures we've never made in Magnums before. Gentilhomme, we did Magnums in 1996 and 1964. The vintage 2012 will release the Magnums of that later this year. And it's like amazing. But honestly, the 2012, which I'm sure you'll agree, Tom, is delicious right now. Honestly, put it in your cellar for like 15, 20 years, and you'll be really, really happy that you did. In terms of percentages, for magnums, for us, anywhere from like 800 to like 1500, depending on the vintage. Outside
Wonderful.
of Go ahead.
We're almost coming up to the hour, but Daniel's jumped up with a good question here. Outside of Champagne, what are your favourite wines? And similarly, what other sparkling wines are you fond of? Have you had much experience with our English sparkling wines?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I'm very much, I feel like a kid who did his studies like in the early 90s. So I feel quite postmodern. Like I really don't believe in false dichotomies of regions. For me, it's more about producers. Like I hate when people say like, you know, this wine from Oregon beat this wine from Burgundy, like in a blind tasting. Like, of course, you can find a bad producer anywhere in the world. You can find an amazing producer anywhere in the world. For me, it's not about the regions anymore. The regions, of course, are important, but it's about the actual producers. Like, how are they farming? How do they treat people? For us at Lenoble, the harvest starts. People that come to work the harvest at Lenoble, they actually stay with us at the house. We actually feed them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We have neighbors in Champagne and in other parts of the world where they sleep in tents on the side of the road, and people don't even care if they're fed or not. So for me, it's about knowing the kinds of producers, their values, their convictions, their way of looking at the world. I think is really, really important to me, much more than a region. I mean, obviously, I mean, Burgundy is amazing. I mean, we spend quite a bit of time in Burgundy because we're cousins and we have quite a lot in common with them. I think having family from Alsace, like I'm very, very partial to Alsace. You know, Riesling is that like amazing thing that every like wine geek loves to talk about, but it sells like so little. So I always have to feel to fly the flag for Riesling. I love Gewürztraminer. I love it. I know it's polarizing. Like some people love it, some people hate it. There's no like in between on Gewürztraminer, but I think it's quite cool. In England, I have had the opportunity to visit a number of producers in England, and I think a lot of producers are really doing some great stuff. The only thing about English producers that I think is something that some of them, most of the better ones, I think have stopped doing. Like I really like Gusborne a lot. I think what Charlie does is really, really good. I think Sherry and Brad at Night Timber, you know, are doing a very good job as well. I think there's lots of people in the UK that are making like really, really great wines. The one thing that lots of English producers need to stop, and obviously Night Timber and Gusborne stopped doing this a while ago because they realized it was pointless. Stop talking about champagne. There's nothing worse than, you know, getting on the Eurostar, going to Sussex, you're a producer, you're so excited to meet someone, and they spend 20 minutes talking about champagne. And I'm like, no, I live there. I don't want to talk about champagne. I don't want to talk about the soil. I don't want to talk about how climate change is a good thing. Like, I want to talk about what you're doing. So I feel like a lot of English producers are making such amazing wine. Stop talking about the French. Like, it's not important. Like, you have amazing terroir, you have amazing craftsmanship, amazing assets. Like, talk about that. Again, the Oregon thing, I don't know if any of you had the experience of going to Oregon like 30 years ago, but when you went to Oregon, they would be like, oh, we're on the exact same latitude as Burgundy. And you'd be like, no, mate, I mean, it's the other side of the world. Like, don't talk to me about, you know, the Côte d'Ivoire when I'm in the Willamette Valley, because it's just really silly. But I think England is doing some really good stuff. I love Franciacorta as a region. I feel like I have to fly the flag for Franciacorta because it's definitely like the most prestigious of the Italian sparkling regions, but it's really hard for them in the UK and in the US because Prosecco has gotten so big that a lot of the very best producers of Franciacorta, they say that in the UK and the US, people say, oh, that's really expensive for a Prosecco. And they say, no, it's not Prosecco. But for a lot of sort of consumers, if it's Italian and it has sparkling, then it has to be Prosecco. So I think it's important for Franciacorta. Tasmania is doing like really, really good stuff as well. I think it's important to support them. Most people don't know like anything about Tasmania or like Tasmanian wines, but I think they're doing really, really good stuff for sure. Piedmont, I mean, who doesn't love Piedmont, right? I mean, Piedmont's just awesome. What do you like, Tom, when you're not drinking champagne and Burgundy?
Yeah, Piedmont, West Coast, Pinot Chardonnay. Yeah, I even allow a little bit of Bordeaux in the house, but not a huge amount, I'm going to be honest. But this has been an absolute joy. We here in the Birdhouse, we've quaffed the 12 and loved it. I know it's a baby, but it's showing really well. I'm super jealous of all of you who've been drinking that super rare 09. But I'm going to say thank you, Christian.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. I'm just sending right now my email before we hang up that everyone got, I hope. So please, please, please email me. Tom knows how to find me, but if you have any questions about champagne, just email me. Like, we're pretty relaxed here. It's just Anne, Antoine, and myself at the house. So if you have any questions about champagne, not just about Champagne Lenoble, but if any of you want to come to the region and you need advice about other producers to visit or restaurants or hotels or anything, like honestly, we don't have any hostesses or brand ambassadors or PR people. For us, it's just us. We're quite relaxed. So if there's anything that you need in Champagne, honestly, let me know.
Thank you
You're
very
a star. Thank you. We're all
Thank
coming
you.
over
That was
next.
great.
You're a star.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, very nice.
Absolutely. Really
Wonderful.
good.
Go and enjoy your curry.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.